The other thing is, like, I wanted to create an asset that maybe we don't cover every square inch of this deck today, but I want it to be a leave behind, something, just reference material for you all, and hopefully for the broader community, just something that can be, at arm's length in the library. So the stuff we're going to cover, I think of it almost in a linear fashion. We'll talk about some of the key differences versus B2C, some of the sales models. We'll quickly touch on the technology, which is important, but that's like its own mastermind session, so I won't go too deep on that. A couple of the really important building blocks: your ideal customer profile, or ICP, your personas, your sales funnel, and your sales process. And then ultimately, the last piece, which maybe deserved a much bigger box, is how to own those relationships, because that is, once you've checked all of the previous boxes, every remaining incremental ounce of energy and attention and heart that you have, you want to go into those relationships. What we're not talking about, which we certainly could, because it's all part of B2B selling, but it's just too much for today. We won't talk about all the stuff that's way upstream: generating leads, managing pipeline, tracking KPIs, the analytical aspects of B2B selling. What you do after the sale, super important. Customer success is obviously, critical, but we won't get into that. And, sort of tangential to that is also the upselling and cross-selling motion. So just to sort of set the expectation. But anyway, that's just sort of a roadmap of what we're getting into. And I'll just quickly talk about my background, why I'm supposedly qualified to talk about this topic. And it's, very much like we're all here where we are today in our careers, but it's a journey, right? So every day I'm learning new things, and I'll hopefully, learn a lot even in this presentation, just based on, what I'm hearing from all of you. So when I think about what I've done, I didn't even always think I would be in sales, and I wasn't always in sales. I actually started my first meaningful sort of career step was when I I had a moment of unforeseen YouTube celebrity around 2006 or so, and social media was blowing up in the sort of public consciousness at that time. And I had, I just sort of stumbled into this overnight celebrity. And then the moment passed, and it was really exciting while it was happening. And then I went back to my day job, and I was like, I just know two things. I know that was awesome, and I know that this sucks. And that really was what inspired me to write a business plan and found a digital marketing agency, which eventually became my first real entrepreneurial venture. I went with it, quit the day job, and it was tough at first. I mean, burned through my life savings, moved in with my parents. Not a good look. I was like in my late 20s, had a girlfriend, like not exactly, making a strong pitch for, a solid romantic relationship when I'm living with my parents. But that is what it is. But what did I get in return? I had the chance to work with some amazing brands. When I exited my business, the acquiring agency was really interested in search marketing, both organic or SEO, as well as search engine marketing or pay per click, right? All the Google ads that now are certainly pervasive across many other platforms. At the time, it was really just mostly like one game in town, Google ads. But that's how we were able to get access to a lot of big brands by saying, hey, us, this agency was known for media planning and buying, doing big display banner campaigns, a lot of social media. And there was this hole in the roster, which was, what do we do about search marketing? And pretty soon, we opened an office in Lagos, Nigeria, and brands like Coca-Cola and Nokia and MasterCard are coming to us saying, switch the lights on. And so I was creating these programs, managing a team remotely that was, servicing this business while also we had offices in New York and London. And it's just really exciting work. Nice thing about being in the agency business is you get access to all of these brands. You touch so many different businesses, and pretty soon you start to compare and contrast and say, all right, I have the client relationship, and that gives me a window into how they think. But then I move on to my next project, and maybe I'm juggling a few at a time, and I can start to see how things are different, how B2B and B2C are different. What does it look like when they're selling, sugar water versus financial services versus travel, right? So it was really exciting. And my business, ClickSharp, acquired by a company called WebLiquid, which today is still around. Like many agencies, they change their identity every so often. So they're called House of Kaizen today. Very exciting. There are a lot of downsides to the agency business, one of which is you're always on the brink of burnout. My wife and I had, she didn't leave me when I moved in with my parents. She stuck with me, to her credit. She, really saw something in me. So I owe her a debt of gratitude. And she and I were expecting our first kid, and I had a job offer from Google, and that was the end of it. I was really okay with leaving the entrepreneurial life behind. Needed some stability, and who was going to say no to Google in 2012? So I worked in the automotive business at Google. I started in after sales. I had clients like AutoZone and Goodyear, and they were a little bit primitive, right? I mean, they would buy a bunch of search, but they weren't doing anything on YouTube. They weren't doing any display, and the idea was to get them smart about not just the ad solutions, but the measurement underlying it all. And so, we started to look from a cross-device perspective. How can we educate clients on a holistic, unified measurement ethos that can get them to understand my buyer, whether they buy online or walk into a store, what are they worth? What is each interaction worth? And what is a micro conversion? If somebody, loads the driving directions to the local Goodyear auto service shop, that has a monetary value. And we started to educate them on how you can use analytics underpinning all of this to make your media really a strategic asset. Eventually, I started working with the OEMs. I used to run the General Motors business globally. Pretty crazy, just flying around the world, just chasing those clients, meeting with CMOs in different markets, and trying to sort of elevate the Google partnership, make it less transactional, decommoditize it, less about ads, and approaching General Motors and saying, you're spending $250 million a year with us. What can we give you on top of all these clicks and impressions? So we would start doing exec summits, and we would start, trying to give access to technology. Android Auto, was an exciting sort of emerging product for infotainment. They always wanted access to the self-driving car technology. Anytime I asked, I would get my hand slapped. They're like, you must be crazy. You think just because you represent $250 million of revenue, like that's enough to get access to Google X in your dreams. So that tells you something about the culture at Google. But it was exciting, and I had a chance to run the first strategy team for Global Automotive. We were just a small team of 5 people, but we supported over 300 people internally who were aligned to $1 billion vertical business. And so raise the ceiling in the mature markets, raise the floor, in those emerging markets. So, the team of 14 in Detroit, it was like, what can we do to give you air cover in these relationships? The guy in New Zealand who covers automotive along with travel and finance, it was like, let me just come bearing gifts, path to purchase research, access to, some sort of analytical insights, anything that they could turn around and use with their clients. I stayed in that business for a while, worked on some other big brands, but just in the sake of moving on, at some point I said I'm sick of selling ads, and I wanted to move into something a little more geared towards social impact. And so in ed tech, I had the benefit of working not only with some of these enterprise clients that you see there, but also working with government and nonprofit partners. Working on economic development initiatives, working with the Department of Labor to get access to workforce development funding. And this was really exciting. We were selling economic mobility. We were looking at the reality of education, which was that, the best jobs were going to people with a 4-year degree. If you wanted a stable middle-class lifestyle, you would go get a job in tech. And that meant, best thing you could do was go to a Stanford or an MIT or a Carnegie Mellon and get that CS degree. But the people who have access to that opportunity are so few and far between. The masses are cut out from that. And these alternative education models were really leveling the playing field and giving us something unique to offer. So we could go to Sacramento and say, hey, you're trying to attract employers and keep them in the greater Sacramento metro area. What they want from you is a pipeline of talent. We're telling you that we can use 3-month boot camps in business analytics to give these companies access to hardworking, upwardly mobile talent that doesn't come in with the baggage of somebody who's been entitled and privileged their whole life. I mean, that's, when you break it down, like, not to say that anyone with a 4-year degree, myself included, is just entitled, but the reality is the playing field needs to be leveled, and I enjoy being part of that right sizing. And so all of this really led me to now, where I'm trying to put it all together to take 20 years of what I've learned running sales and marketing operations and entire organizations, but applying it to social impact. So what have I learned along the way that I can now repackage, work with clients in education and future of work, but also climate tech, healthcare, renewable energy, like a lot of exciting things being done nowadays in that realm. So anyway, a little bit long-winded, but that's, my answer to the question, well, how did I get to be here talking about this? And so let's get into the actual, kind of meat and potatoes of it. How are we looking at this differently from B2C? Well, since I've got a bunch of, seasoned B2B experts on the call, I'm not going to, probably not going to spend too much time on this because it's already intuitive to you. But from an audience point of view, you're dealing with very different people. You're dealing with business decision makers and more of them, right? How often is a consumer purchase really multi-threaded? You want to sell a car to someone, yeah, you're probably going to have to talk to the person who walked into the dealership and their spouse, and they've probably got other people in their ear, but those are really the exception. Nobody buys Huggies diapers thinking, okay, I got to check with my sounding board of a half dozen advisors. From a sales process point of view, it tends to be longer, more drawn out, more headwinds, more touch points. From a decision-making point of view, right, everybody's covering their asses. If I, as a joint head of household, as a father in my household, go and buy a half pound of sliced turkey, and I screw up and get the wrong thing, I'm not going to get butchered by my children or my wife, right? But if I go and buy the wrong software and I get stuck in a 3-year contract for something that we can't deploy, someone's going to really take me to task on that, and they should, right? So the decision-making process is different, and underlying that, the motivation, right? So using that same example, if I'm making a software purchase, maybe it's a productivity enhancement for our operations. As a sales leader, I might look at that in terms of helping my team get more, at bats in the marketplace. As a CFO, I'm thinking, hey, this helps me avoid hiring more people. As an individual contributor, it might be like, hey, I don't have to be burned out on the job anymore. So there's a lot, everyone comes with their own motivations. Whereas in B2C, it's a lot more ephemeral, right? Like the software example may or may not apply, but a consumer packaged good like a bar of soap, right? I mean, I'm going to look at it very differently than buying enterprise software. Complexity of the product. This is one that actually over time has really flexed. Everything is so much more complex to buy, and we have the internet to thank for that, because it's created more information at our fingertips, and it's giving us the ability to be more educated. This is probably the #1 golden rule of B2B selling. Probably deserves its own slide, but your customer is showing up to the meeting probably as smart as you are about that product, if not more so. This is why auto dealerships have been caught completely off guard, and 20 years after these changes started to happen, they're still trying to unwind these changes. Like, how do we, it used to be that like they would hold the brochures right there in the dealership. They own all the information, and they basically can hold you hostage with it, because ignorance is a really, really expensive thing. Now people show up, and I mean, last time I bought a car, I certainly knew more about that car than the person selling it to me. And I know I'm not the only one, right? So the complexity is an important piece of it. Sales tactics, yeah, the stuff that you do in order to grease the purchase funnel, very, very different from a B2B versus a B2C point of view. The way you rely on promotions, the way you try to create urgency, and some of the tools that you have at your disposal. And then finally, the customer relationship. More often than not, B2B, that signature, that click, or that, execution of a contract is really the starting point. And the financial models underpinning B2B sales organizations are very much predicated on, how do we make sure this person comes back? How do we make sure they tell their friends, right? Their peers in the industry. And if they're buying product A, can we get them to buy B and C as well? And that there's some applicability with consumer, but it's very, very different. So given that on this call we've got people that certainly know B2B inside and out, I'm wondering if any one of these stands out for any of you. Any that you've had particular difficulty sort of handling or adjusting to.
I would say the consultative selling part. Again, because it's so time consuming, right? And depending upon what your product is, a consultation, this is something that I look at very frequently, is I could take a 30-minute meeting, but what's the maximum revenue that has the potential to earn me? And unless I'm selling, contracts in the tens of thousands, it's often not a great use of my time. Whereas with mass marketing, you can press a button and it goes out to everybody. Right. And you look at like the amount of time that you spend creating that asset and deploying it and what it can achieve. I mean, that's the biggest thing for me, where I look at how can I take something that has to do, how can I productize this to some degree so that I'm not just tethered to consultative selling all the time.
Yeah. Consultative selling is quite time consuming. But sometimes it's the only way forward. And it really kind of reframes our whole idea of quantity versus quality, right? For some products, it's okay to spray out to, 1,000 people at a time. Anyone who's ever run an email newsletter or an e-commerce business that, is tightly intertwined with social media, for example, they know that instant gratification of clicking send or clicking post and then just watching the money come in. It's like printing money. But there's a whole other language you speak when you have to sort of get in lockstep with that client, sort of like take them by the hand and shepherd them through. So I definitely relate to that.
I think the flip side of that, though, is that they're usually stickier clients, right? I mean, totally to your point, Kristen, it can be a time suck and when you evaluate your time, maybe questionable. But if you get in these and you're doing a good job, it's harder for them to leave you than it is for somebody on the consumer side to just make a decision to try a different product.
Very true. And that's, therein lies the calculus, Kirsten, because, right, it's like, different products respond differently to those different sales motions, as do different personalities on the other side of that transaction, as do, all these other mitigating factors, seasonality, competition, et cetera.
And it's those mitigating factors, again, when you look at the business decision makers, those longer sales cycles. When I had my consulting practice, I would fly on my own dime to go meet with clients on site in various cities. I'd go to conferences that were costing me $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to go, and meeting all of these people. And then, the as great as the meeting would go, half the time it got blocked by some other mitigating factor that had nothing to do with me. And I know that was one of the reasons why, when I was consulting, I decided to, when the opportunity arose, to sunset my consulting practice, because it was just, that part was getting so frustrating for me. And maybe I just sucked at what I was doing as well. That could have been the selling part, and not making the right decisions about the meetings to take and the time and the money to spend to actually execute those meetings. But I do know that was always a hugely frustrating part when it didn't follow through.
Well, there is always that learning curve, and that's part of the journey, and that's what makes it fun. Okay, so we'll move on a little bit. Now, this is one of those slides where I don't necessarily plan to just read off the matrix to you, but I want to just quickly sort of delineate, in the B2B world, the different complexity of it, and probably some of us, know some of these models, maybe all of them. When we think of direct selling, that's often where our minds go when we think of sales, right? We think, all right, I'm the vendor, they're the client or customer. there's going to be a transaction, and off we go. And that is often how it's done, but that's also very resource intensive. And, it speaks to those consultative relationships that you were talking about earlier, Kristen. And there are other ways to skin that cat. I'm always a big fan of discussions around channel partnerships because it's all about finding side doors, right? So you want to, like, if you were selling, door to door, like the Cutco knives, always the best example of door to door selling, right? So that's a good model for direct sales. I have my list. I walk up to the front door, ring the bell, hope that they're there. If they're there, I hope that I can start a relationship, hope that I can close them. Well, what about the side door where maybe metaphorically speaking, the person who answers the door might not be the best buyer? It might be, instead of the kid who was playing video games, presses pause and answers the door, maybe it's the mom or dad who's cooking and has like a rusty blade and is almost about to cut their finger off. Okay, now we have a solution for Cutco. Channel selling is where we can sort of take advantage of resources that already exist. And if we see someone out there that we can establish a trusting partnership with, that we can actually widen the pie, create more demand for a product or service in which we're both invested, and hopefully uniquely invested, so that it doesn't become sort of a oppositional relationship. Inside selling, this is really big in the SaaS world because it's a product that once you've created it, copy pasting it a million times over is virtually zero incremental cost. And so the question becomes, if we've got something that's intuitive, that has good reviews, that sells itself, then all we really need are people who can just proverbially ring the doorbell, and they don't have to actually be there. It's like ring and run, or ding dong ditch if you're in the Midwest. I learned that's ring and run on the East Coast was ding dong ditch in the Midwest. But I think the idea is that it's low touch and high volume. Field selling, sort of a combination of both. You're out there in the field, but you're also, there is a direct selling component, but you're also doing a lot of sort of back office work to make that very high touch investment scalable. And then account-based sales would probably be the highest touch of all, where you typically have very senior salespeople that have very short lists of large organizations where they see their prospective client not as the logo, but as the 15 or 20 or 50 people in that organization who need to have some kind of opinion about what they're buying in order to sign off on it. And it works, but it's a balancing act, to say the least. So, these are just some of the ways in which, different organizational designs have manifested in order to facilitate the B2B selling process. I said we would talk about technology. So the spoiler here is that for today's conversation and for, I would say, the vast majority of cases relevant to this group and this community, it really just comes down to CRM. Selling a B2B is a relationship game. At some point, you just have too many of them to keep track. And that's the reactive component. I just need a place to keep them all. Then you get to the proactive component of, what if I could very seamlessly onboard all kinds of really interesting metadata to differentiate these people and re-engage them efficiently on terms that are meaningful to them? Well, all of that lives in your CRM. As you go up the hierarchy, there are other tools that start to become more valuable to facilitate scalable lead generation, to manage the relationship post-sale and really make those customers successful. Sales intelligence, what can we do to just be smarter about who we prospect in the first place? And then marketing automation, which really is just about linking that demand generation function with the demand closure function. How can we make sure that the people out there in the marketing department who are getting others to care about our product and our brand and our mission are in lockstep with the people downstream who have to get out there, knock on that door, so to speak, put their reputation on the line? You want seamless integration between those. As you go higher up, you start getting into, if you've got enough iterations in your sales process, you're going to start saying, okay, well, we've got too many proposals out there. We can't even track them all. Contracts, sales enablement function is basically all about making sure the right collateral is available at the right time for the right scenario. Sales quotes, proposal management, yes, all of that. Sales engagement is a fascinating new category where you look at some of the low-tech aspects of selling, like just picking up the phone and calling, or orchestrating a direct mail campaign. How do you measure it? Sales engagement tools such as outreach are incredibly meaningful. And then, up here is where you start to get really advanced analytics, start to clean some of that data at scale so that you can really make it actionable. For what purpose? Just to repeat the cycle and to make it all work a little more smoothly so you can get your next dollar with a little less human resource. Effectively, that's what it all comes down to. Any CRO and any CFO, that is generally the bedrock of their relationship, is how can I hit my number, is what the CRO is saying. The CFO is saying, I'll give you everything you need to do it. You just have to spend a little less than the last time. And so on this next slide, this is just for reference, but each of those boxes on the last slide got some examples, of different platforms. I haven't used all of these tools. I happen to love HubSpot for CRM, love LinkedIn Sales Navigator for prospecting. There's some here. HighSpot is great, I think, for managing collateral. I've used it in big organizations. I would never use it in a solopreneur, consulting operation. But Outreach, SalesLoft, Tableau, there are good ones. If anyone ever, has questions, I'm happy to tell you, what I can about these. So before we go any further, now that we're out of the technical and philosophical and we're getting more into some of the actual tactical pieces, I just want to pause. Any questions that have come up, any reactions, anything at all? Okay, silence is golden. Great. So what makes a customer a good fit for your product or service? The ICP is what answers this. And it's supposed to be your wish list, your want ad, right? If doing business was a dating app, this is the person you're out there looking for, right? And it's just a very detailed dossier of who you want. Not everybody's going to conform to every single checkbox that you put out there, but you have to set a standard. You have to know what you're aiming for. And it's important to also signal to not only externally, but internally, so that everybody's rowing in the same direction, right? Without an ICP, the people that are in charge of prospecting are going to go rogue and use their own proxy definition of who the company's out there chasing. And then downstream, salespeople are either going to get leads that are not in total alignment and get frustrated, or they're going to start doing their own prospecting, which they're not compensated for, or something else like raise hell and just get upset and be difficult employees, right? So all of these are perfectly typical scenarios if you don't have a really solid articulation of your ICP. And there's really three components. So firmographically, you want to think of, hey, we sell software. Our software is used by healthcare companies of 1,000 employees and up, because we know that maybe it's too expensive for small companies. Maybe outside of healthcare, nobody's ever going to care about our value prop, or maybe that's where we have the best case studies. And we're an American company today. We only do business in North America, so don't give me companies in the ICP that are in Europe or Asia. Fine, that's very easy, and that's the easy part of defining the ICP. It gets harder when you start thinking about the people that comprise this organization, because there are sometimes titles that don't exist, right? So what if your software solution for healthcare was about compliance with data privacy and security regulations? Okay, at a company of 1,000 plus employees, is there a chief compliance officer? Is there a chief data officer? Is there a chief information security officer? At 1,000 employees, you might have some of those. You might not have all of them. Maybe you got to go up to 5,000 for all those titles. But if you don't have that individual, it gets a little risky because now, well, who am I going to? Am I going to go to the CIO for all of this, or the CHRO, or the chief, legal officer? Like, that might be a shot in the dark, and I may lower my hit rate going to the wrong person. So this is how, some of these indicators start to intertwine. Sometimes you don't even have a department, right? Like in some organizations, for example, I mean, as a marketer and as someone who sold to marketers for a long time in my career, I always got so frustrated. There are big companies out there that don't do marketing. So do your homework, make sure that, these demographics also line up. And then the psychographic is the hardest part, because it's very hard to know these things before you've actually taken the meeting. And by the time you've taken the meeting, you've targeted them, you've prospected them. And so you've effectively used some form of an ICP to get to them. And in a way, it's a catch-22. Well, how do I know? You learn and iterate. So I want chief information security officers at healthcare companies of 1,000+ employees who suffer from the downstream effects of a compliance-related lawsuit. Okay, they have very unique pain points and challenges. It's not going to be everybody, but after I've met 5 of them, I might see a pattern of what they have in common, and that might translate into ways that I can better identify those companies upstream. And they have certain goals and objectives. Probably avoiding a lawsuit would be high on that list, right? Their purchasing behavior, well, it's a lot less about being innovative and being perceived as ahead of the curve, and it's a lot more about avoiding some catastrophic, 8-figure judgment. So these are some of the different, sort of building blocks that go into an ICP. And if you're doing it right, what are you doing? You're effectively making yourself better at targeting, so you don't waste time going after the clientele that is not going to do business with you. You're deploying your resources more efficiently, and that means you're not going to burn out, your salespeople. You're using them to their most, effective, and you're using them to the best of their abilities. You're gonna invest in them by giving them the best possible leads and keep them happy, because they are the face of your company. So these are all benefits from just doing your homework with the ICP. Anybody in the group have a particularly challenging ICP, or just approach this and, run into some difficulty?
Yeah, I would say that, again, with my consulting practice, doing architectural and engineering consulting for landmark properties, I never knew who I was talking to. So it was half the time these sorts of projects were driven by their marketing teams, right? Like, we need to activate something on this property in order to drive value for our retail or commercial tenants and increase our, footprint with regard to PR, stuff like that. Other times they would be revenue driven. Like, I need an activation on this property that's going to be profitable as a standalone business. And that was typically some sort of operations team or some sort of, even on the development side, sometimes it would be those teams. So I know that trying to find the right person within an organization, and I think that, looking back, might be one of the reasons why I failed so much in those meetings, because I would have a fantastic conversation with like the marketing team at some conference, and they'd want to work with me, but they'd get back home and a project like this is really more under the scope of their operations team, and their operations team, it's just not a priority for them the same way it was for their marketing team. And so it would get kicked down the line. So I agree that, like, identifying that right person definitely would have saved me, or that who that person is within that organization, before I spend the time and money to fly somewhere and talk to people or whatever, would have helped ease that stress for me.
Yeah, and it's sometimes often a question of and, not if, right?
Mhm.
So you don't probably regret building rapport with that marketing team, but probably the difference maker in that transaction would have been if you could have simultaneously gotten that operations team on board. And that's where, just to further muddy the water, sometimes the very best conversations with that marketing team would be to ask the kinds of probing questions that early on identify them as, are you the decision maker? Are you the final, like sign off for this? No, it's ops. Okay, so who should I be talking to? Who do you work well with that we could get on board here? So what you're talking about there, that marketing person that you're talking to becomes your champion. They sell on your behalf internally in the organization because, maybe that ops person is the second link in the chain, and only marketing and ops together can get you to, let's say, the CMO or the COO, who is the economic buyer. They're the ones that actually have the authority to sign on the dotted line and make that deal happen. What I just described there is a sales methodology called MEDPIC, which is an acronym that I won't get into, but that's one of many approaches where you basically, how do these methodologies work? It all comes down to breaking down the organization, the people that represent different aspects of the buying process, and why they all matter and how they all intertwine. So I think that what you're talking about is a very, very common scenario. And hey, that's why this group is uniquely qualified to get out there and really, affect change in the B2B world, because we've got the strong stomach for it, right?
How about in situations where, my client targets were usually organizations of, 2,000 to 5,000 employees, pretty large, decently large corporations. And what I found most of the time is that the right hand in corporations of that size, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, right? And that was always a blocker for me. And then when I went and started working for corporations like that, I encountered that as a buyer. I would go out and do an entire RFP process for a project I wanted to do. I'd narrow it down to 3 vendors. We'd have a whole thing. And then I'd learn that, oh, the San Francisco office is working on the same, say it's a CRM or something. Like the San Francisco office is halfway through this process as well. So we want to roll this out unilaterally across the entire organization. So all of my work was just like whatever. And the people who have spent the time building relationships with me are now dead in the water because we decided to go with what the West Coast is doing or something. How do you, I know that you can't prevent that totally, but like, what are some questions that you can ask and some ways that you can maybe navigate through situations like that?
Well, you must have somehow gotten a glimpse of my top secret slides ahead of time, because
Oh, sorry.
actually,
Okay.
no, it's a perfect segue.
Right.
It's a perfect segue into buyer personas, right? So what you're saying is basically in these larger organizations, you saw it as a seller, then you saw it as the buyer, where what it came down to was multiple individuals with unique agendas coming together in pursuit of a common goal. If you as the salesperson can herd those cats and make that happen, that is an incredibly valuable skill. People that do that never go hungry. In fact, people that do that ride off into the sunset and are generally incredibly successful, and they do what they want. They get the best leads. They get assigned to the best accounts. It's just because that really is the skill that dwarfs every other skill. If you can herd those cats and get people on board, coalition building, incredibly valuable. Now, as the buyer, right, do you have the motivation and the desire to do the same? You might, if you feel strongly about it, right? If you're in one department and you're saying this could be a game changer for me, and I trust this salesperson, he or she understands my needs and the needs of the company, I'm going to get on board. I'm their champion. But there's a finite amount of human resource you're going to plow into herding those cats. It helps that salesperson is good at that and is a partner in the process. But really what it comes down to is a really intimate understanding of who are the VIPs in that process and what do they care about. So personas, this is why it was such a great segue, because the personas are the answer to that. So you're creating these fictional representations of the different stakeholders, protagonists in this process. And sometimes, sometimes it's the marketing department, or sometimes it might be sales ops or, strategy team that does this. And they'll come up with cute names, where it'll be like, we'll actually give a name to this persona. Fine. What it comes down to, though, is why are they unique? Because they represent something specific in the process. So I'll start with the end in mind. If you have these representations, we'll get to how you build them in a moment, but if you have them, what would that allow you to do? Well, you could message to certain individuals very specifically, and you could speak to their concerns, and you could use language that matters to them. You could personalize it. When they come back with some kind of objection, you're ready because you knew that person with that title and that persona represents an objection that is different from the next person, and you're ready. You can build your solution, in a customized way. And what that does is it makes you more agile, quicker to the punch, less drag on the sales cycle, right? So you're improving your performance and you're also improving the experience for them. So improve customer satisfaction, right? It's not like when a deal cycle takes forever. It's not like the salesperson is the only person that gets frustrated by that. The buyer gets frustrated by it too, for many of the reasons you just talked about. So if you can set an agenda that helps it make it easy and a little more pleasant for them, you're doing them a huge favor. So I'm not going to go through these line by line, but I just, quickly like drummed up what personas might look like if, let's say, we were selling, let's say we are Ad Habit and I'm Andy and I'm saying, okay, well, who are the people that I need to get on board to sell agency services for Amazon ads, right? So these companies are all, they're selling consumer products. They want to sell through Amazon, whether or not they're selling through other channels, doesn't matter. Maybe they go direct, maybe they have other channel partners, doesn't matter. There's a CMO, there's a director under them, there's probably some more junior people that are responsible for content. Maybe there's somebody who's managing the agency. Just look at the diversity from a responsibility point of view, right? The CMO versus, the lowly intern and everyone in between, right? What are their objectives? Who are they accountable to? What motivates them? What keeps them up at night, right? And when you come in guns blazing, what are their objections? If I've got an AI powered solution to make, Amazon selling efficient and effective for your company, and I'm the CMO, I might just be skeptical. Like, I don't know if we're ready for AI. Whereas, the content marketing manager, maybe they're on board with AI and they're just thinking, okay, yeah, but is this going to play nice with all the other stuff we've got? And you're not going to talk to those people the same way. You have to throttle, these different personas. I also like to look at what they read because the persona discussion is so intimately a marketing discussion, even if it manifests in the sales environment. We want to start influencing them as soon as possible. So if that CMO is skeptical about AI, then let's start working to affect change at a very, very high level, starting with the awareness of our solution, how it's powered by AI, why this is different from the other kinds of AI that you're going to be skeptical about. And yeah, downstream, we'll also talk about how it integrates with other tools, but this is for the CMO who's reading Harvard Business Review. That really matters a lot. And then ultimately how we help them. So the value prop, you want a central value prop for your whole brand and product, but it will splinter into different articulations for these different personas. So spoiler alert, like you can build a very quick matrix of personas using AI very quickly, and then, maybe just go over it with a fine-tooth comb, make some changes where you see fit based on what you know. But this took like 45 seconds. So relatively easy. Kristen, does that speak, at least in broad strokes, to the scenario you were talking about?
It does. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so personas, that's fun stuff. Not everything is as fun as creating personas. But it's all important. And I think we all know the concept of the funnel. We all know why it matters. Funnel is basically vernacular for, any path to success in business. And so, it's not like I can just break this down into 3 easy steps, but, the process more or less boils down to understanding the journey from the moment they got introduced to you through to when they sign on the dotted line. And really, the funnel is the wrong construct because it should be more hourglass shaped. After that signature, there is the whole discussion of what happens even beneath that opening of the funnel. And that is, what are we doing not only to upsell and cross-sell and make that a profitable relationship, but what are we doing to take care of them? so that they come back at the end of that contract, and so that they go and tell, they act as a steward, represent us, refer us, because that is the absolute cheapest, most effective way to build business, is just to have your best customers say nice things about you. But in that journey, there are all these touch points, and those touch points tend to congeal around different stages. And so, you could very easily think about a stage at the top during that building awareness phase, right? I mean, the kinds of touch points, it's going to be more like a banner ad on a blog, or, a booth at a trade show. That's very different from a touch point, where you're in the meeting and you've got the contract in hand or in your inbox ready to click send, right? But at every point in the process, there are pain points. We touched on this in the personas segment, where we talked about how those pain points are all unique to different people. Now we're also saying there are pain points that are unique to different stages. And so one way you might look at a funnel, you might say, okay, at the very highest level, we got our qualified buyers and influencers. Fine. At some point, they graduate, they become leads. And that means maybe they're, ready to take that second meeting. They're ready to sign up for a discussion with a sales engineer. Whatever it might be, it's critical that you define it very concretely, so that there is no gray area between one and the other, because nirvana is when you can identify the number of prospects distinctly from the number of leads, and you can look at how much time and how much budget you've spent engaging them, and come up with some very clear P&L on how much does it cost to put the next one through the funnel. Some of those leads turn into pilots, where they basically say, hey, we'll do this. We're not going to go full blast, but we'll do it. And then at some point they become customers, where that pilot went well and they're ready to scale up. Everybody's funnel is going to look different. The stages, the elements of each stage are going to be different, but effectively this is what it comes down to. I think everyone knows this. Where it gets interesting is, how do you align it to a sales process? So stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I gave you one example on the last slide, but whatever those stages are, the framework is, how can you define as thoroughly and precisely as possible what are their objectives? What are your objectives in that stage? What are the activities you're going to do in that stage to move it forward? What are the assets you rely on in order to get that job done? What are the actions you take in your CRM to document your progress, not only to benchmark yourself, but to give visibility to your leadership so that they don't have to take a meeting with you to find out what the hell's going on? The qualifying steps, how do I know when I'm ready to go from stage 1 to stage 2? And who do I have to alert in order to move on to the next one? So once I've checked all those boxes in the qualifying steps, do I just have to go tell my VP of sales, hey, it's probably not the VP. Maybe it's, a middle manager. This prospect, our objective was to, get them familiar with our solution. We did the initial capabilities. We did some discovery and got answers to a bunch of questions. I recorded them in this asset. I tracked it in the CRM, and the qualifying step would be, they're ready to do a demo. Check. Boss, this is me saying we're ready for stage 2. Boss says thumbs up. Now we're in stage 2. So this needs to be incredibly detailed. This is what it looks like. This is an actual sales process that I built for a client, took out some, sensitive data, and this is what it looks like. So, on your own time, you could certainly look through it and just get a sense of, for this particular business, what does it look like? I would say, as soon as you have a volume of opportunity in your CRM where it becomes really important to differentiate one stage from the next, some version of this you're going to want. And this is the first 3, and then you got the next 3. And, really this is to make sure that there is less individual bias in your CRM, and that, salesperson A looks somewhat similar to B, C, D, E, F, G, so that as a sales leader, or as the C-suite, or as the board, you don't have to scratch your heads wondering, well, what does this all amount to? You want crystal clarity in your CRM. The sales process is how you get there.
This is gold. That matrix that's outstanding. Thank you, Paul.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, it's really just this, right?
Yeah.
And each of us, those blank boxes on this slide, each of us know what belongs in there. It's just a question of writing it down. And some of those assets may not be built yet, but the point is, you know what you got to do. Okay. So the last sort of building block of all of this is the relationships, and it warrants really double clicking on some philosophical priorities. One of which is this truism here, which is that in your typical funnel, you're going to have the highest volume of opportunities at the top. And naturally, through self-selection, that funnel becomes tighter and tighter. You never end up with more opportunities at the bottom than at the top. That's just the basic arithmetic of sales. But you want to be oriented in a way that you think of the opposite when it comes to where you allocate your time. If you've got one deal at the very bottom of the funnel, or you've got a dozen, doesn't matter. You spend all your time closing those. At some point, if it feels like too much time, then that's a different discussion. That may not have been a qualified lead. That may have been doomed from the start. Fine. That's a conversation that at some point you may have with yourself or with your sales leadership or whomever. But if that deal is close at hand, you spend all the time you can closing it, and you work your way up from there. So if you abide by this philosophy, here is the 4-piece framework that I like to think of when it comes time to really own those relationships. You build rapport. You sell in a consultative manner, to use the point you made earlier, Kristen. You anticipate and handle their objections, and they're coming. It's only a matter of time. And then you close. And closing might seem like the easiest part once you've done all of that, but actually closing is where the most curveballs happen. So you just want to be prepared and brace yourself. And that's why, by the way, the time spent closing part is dark green at the bottom, prominently there, because in that closing phase, anything and everything will come at you. So
really quickly, I just want to make a reference to, for those of you who may have either watched or been in attendance for the subscription business model session we did with Dan Layfield. He said something that really aligns with this, and that is in like a subscription business model, B2C, or low touch B2B, the checkout page is the only place where 1% improvement in efficiency equals a 1% improvement in revenue. Everywhere else down the funnel, it gets diluted, right? And so I think that that's a very consistent way of looking at the sales process across all mediums, not just B2B. So I just wanted to bring that up, but thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I like that analogy, and I think it's very germane, to the complexity of human relationships, right? You could say at the end of the day, there is that one person holding the pen ready to sign, and then there's you trying to will them to do it through ESP or whatever means you have, right? And at the end of the day, any small thing can have a very, sort of noteworthy impact on that. And so we take it seriously for that reason. Zig Ziglar is one of the many sales gurus out there. He's written some very interesting books. They're worth reading, but then again, many are. But this is a great quote that I've always kept close at hand. People don't buy for logical reasons. They buy for emotional reasons. Yet what do? We go out there and we pummel them with data and features and collateral, and we throw reviews and testimonials at them. Those are all logical drivers of the purchase process. You can't win without them. I'm not saying that they don't consider your product for logical reasons. But at the end of the day, why do they buy? It's going to be some combination of, I like you. You made me feel good. I trust you. Your company's reputation precedes these conversations. I feel okay. I'm going to entrust my career to you because I know that there are 1,000,001 reasons your product makes sense. But if somehow I got burned, it's my ass. All of these are the emotional drivers of a purchase, and they all matter a whole lot more than that data you showed that demonstrates a 10% improvement over the competition, right? So This is a very, very important thing to remember. And really what it amounts to is, in order to probe those emotional drivers of the purchase, there's just a lot of boxes we need to check. There's a lot of prerequisites. We need to be active listeners. That way, we're not just reading from a script. We're not just hitting a dozen questions as part of a discovery script, but we're actively listening, responding to what they say, showing them we're listening and that we took the trouble to step outside our own consciousness and adopt theirs. We ask probing questions, put them in the hot seat a little bit. I'm not talking about asking sensitive personal questions. I'm asking about, I'm talking about asking questions that really fast forward to the core drivers of the purchase, showing a genuine interest. Hey, your life could be better because of the product that I'm here to talk to you about. What would that mean for you? How would you feel? Can you get promoted off of this? That's always a nice one, by the way. Something to put in the discovery or even in the ICP, right? Something that gets us thinking about, we have a champion here, somebody who's willing to go to the mat to represent us. What would it take to get them promoted? Can we help them? Finding common ground. Hey, you and me, we're not so different. You want efficiency in your sales process. I've got a product that can help you do it. Delivering on promises, that one goes without saying. Ditto transparency and honesty. That's just all about trust. And without trust, all the other emotions kind of don't matter. And then finally, credibility through expertise. So that is perhaps the one that is the most on the logical side of the spectrum. But if you think about it, that credibility is eliciting a real emotion because it's a hedge. It's an insurance policy. If I listen to this salesperson talk about my industry and the problems affecting my industry, and then talking about my competitors and what they're doing that I'm not, and then giving me a get out of jail free card and saying, I've got something that we haven't sold to your competitors yet, but you ought to try this out, demo it. You've got nothing to lose. By showing them that actually I know a lot of it, I cared enough to think about their problems, that builds credibility. And now when it's time to sign, emotionally, hey, that sales guy, he's all right. So the second piece is the consultative selling. And really just think of it as yin and yang. There's the traditional way and there's the consultative way. And everything has a diametric opposite. Traditional selling, you've got a product. Hey, look at my widget. Look inside my briefcase. I've got the best ball bearings you could imagine, right? Whereas the consultative seller will say, is it a ball bearing that you need? Maybe what you need is some leadership training for your C-suite because your problem is not at the ball bearing level, right? So you're thinking a little bit more about what can I do to solve your problem versus how can I fit my square peg into a round hole. You're going to customize your sales pitch, and it's really predicated on listening and asking questions. Instead of cramming your solution, something that's built for speed, you're going to build it for comfort, which means a custom solution that speaks to your prospects' top concerns. And ultimately, the time orientation is big. Traditional salesperson gets in and gets out. That's the proverbial Cutco door-to-door model. Hey, you're not going to take my knife? I'm out of here. Versus the consultative selling, which is to say, let's build a relationship. Maybe you don't need a knife. Maybe you're not even in the market for any cutlery whatsoever. What you need is enterprise HR software. Okay, well, that's not me, but I can make a referral. And then one day, 6 months later, they come back and they say, that referral you made really helped me, and today I need a knife. So there's a lot of ways, to look at this, but it's really about caring about this prospect at the other side of the table. And how do you arm yourself to be a consultative seller? You just got to know their needs inside and out. You got to know your value prop. How do you map your product to that need? And then turn it into a solution-based pitch. Instead of, this is my product, it's, this is your problem, this is my solution. Sounds easy. In theory, it is. In practice, a lot harder, but not impossible. Objection handling. So there are a lot of ingredients that go into the slew of objections you're going to get in a typical B2B sales cycle. They could be about money. They could be about, why do we even need this? Or they might say, now's not the time, or who the hell are you? Or we're already working with your competitor, or I don't know, it just seems risky. Best thing you can do is acknowledge it, listen to it actively, show empathy. Yeah, I would be concerned if I didn't know this brand that just showed up on my doorstep hawking this product. Sure, I can appreciate that, but let me tell you something about your industry that maybe you didn't know. The technology is changing. You've never heard of us because we were only founded 6 months ago, and we were founded with something new and exciting that speaks to a problem that I know you have. So now we move into responding to it and saying, hey, the client says, all right, I'm listening, tell me more. Well, our value prop is that we can solve the problem you've had, but we can do it in a unique way. It might save you money. It might shorten the time to the finish line. It might avoid hiring more people, whatever it might be. I'm now responding to your needs, and now I'm really in a position to overcome it. So they say, yeah, all right, that sounds interesting. I can get past my hang up that I'd never heard of you, and I'm willing to mortgage a little bit of my internal credibility by bringing in my boss. And you've earned that. But you're still going to need to show me a solution. So show me you understand that problem and that your product is not just a product, but actually a solution. Give me some social proof. So if I've never heard of your brand, at least show me someone who's thriving with your product. Let me talk to them. Let me do a reference call, or show me some reviews online. I don't know. The best, most powerful way is when you calculate ROI. This doesn't work for every business, but when you can basically say, this is what you're spending today, the solution to that problem represents this much cost savings or this much incremental revenue. Either one works. And this is how much better off you are quantifiably. You do two things. First of all, you save them the trouble of doing that math and doing that homework. And it's not like they don't know math and they're not ready to do homework, but they're all busy. So you save them that trouble, but you've also demonstrated implicitly that you cared enough to learn their business and to go out and basically do your homework. So that's a hell of a way to handle an objection. And then it's time to close. So very intuitively, first thing is, let's create some urgency. And that means, all right, you basically say you're ready to close. And based on what we've seen about these deals in the past, you seem to exhibit all the behaviors of someone who's ready to close, but you're not closing. So maybe I got to turn up the heat a little bit. What are the implications of not taking action now? You know, if you have to be the salesperson that's like, well, you're going to miss the summer sales event, you're going to miss out on that low price. Yeah, some people do that. It's not my favorite tactic, but it does work. It's actually more of a B2C tactic. Some of these things, like I said, sort of transcend. But what are the implications of not taking action now? Well, going back to this ROI calculation, what if you say, this problem that we can solve for you is costing you $500,000 a day? So what the hell are you waiting for? Right? That might be, some C-level. That might be their salary every day. And one day, the board or the CEO might be like, what the hell took you so long? This wasted a ton of money, right? So create some urgency, ask for the sale. Because we've got a group of good B2B sellers here, I know I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard haven't heard before. But everyone talks about the famous quote from Michael Jordan, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Well, all right, there's something beautifully simple about that. But the point is, we don't often ask for the sale. We dance around it. We don't want to be so forward. We don't want to stick our necks out. We don't want to hear no. These are all terrible reasons not to ask for the sale. Just ask for the freaking sale. And basically say, okay, so are we ready to do business together? And why is that important? Well, first of all, because it might signal to them, yep, you're ready, I'm ready, let's do this. But in the process, if the answer is anything other than that, you're in a very good position to find out why. And by finding out why, you now have the ability to make a few more turns of the wrench and make an even more compelling proposition, get closer to actually closing. And then the last piece is the follow through. And this is really more about your reputation and the future of that relationship than anything else. Because when you get the signature, fine. At this point, they're obligated to pay you. If they don't, someone's going to court, and no one wants that. But the follow through is so important because you just asked all of these people to stick their necks out for you. Stay on their team, right? Keep them on your side. Over deliver. You won't regret it. It's the little incremental unit of energy that you put in just to write a note and be like, hey, it's been a week. How's it going so far? Or were we able to demonstrate some wins that are now making it easier for you to do your job? Have we started to move the needle on what we promised you? Like, these things matter a lot. And this is not the same as customer success, where those account managers are toiling away, making sure that the delivery is rock solid. This is you, the salesperson, who's no longer incentivized, just saying, hey, I was thinking about you. Let's go out for a drink, celebrate, right? That's part of the follow through. Okay. I spent a lot of time talking at you. I wanted to just leave you with one last thing, since I know we're all avid readers in this community. I went through all the books I've ever read. I keep a list. And I picked a half dozen that in some way, shape, or form really helped shape my sense of identity as a salesperson. And I'll go through these one by one. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is held up as a shining example of a sales manual, but the truth is, this is just about easy ways to get in the mindset of treating people well so that you are irresistible to them. It's about creating magnetism in your relationships. And I've read it maybe 4 times. It's phenomenal. By the way, the book's like, I don't know, almost 100 years old. Tells you something. It's still relevant today. Daniel Pink is a psychologist turned author, has some amazing perspectives on the left brain and the right brain, and in a changing world, the role of each. What I like about this book is that a lot of people say, well, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not in sales. That is utter BS. Everybody is in sales. It's maybe that's a bold statement. Maybe that sounds needlessly provocative, but I truly believe it, because if you're not hawking a product or leading a team that does, you're still selling ideas. You might be a low-level engineer building the product. Well, you're still selling your ideas, because you're going to have opinions about the right way to do it, or the process, the assets you deploy, the way you collaborate. Everybody sells. It is a human skill, and it is one that we all possess. So some people will say, oh, great sellers are born, not made. There are aspects of that are true, but everybody possesses, in my opinion, the basic ability to be effective, at least to a point. Doesn't mean everybody should be out there selling, B2B SaaS, but to sell is human. Great book. These two go together. This is very technical. This is like a manual, and it's for sales managers, but I think it's actually really meaningful. So Sales Management Simplified is effectively just managing the business you have. New Sales Simplified puts a different spin on it, and it's where do you go out and get your new business. But in both cases, it's a manual for leaders. But what it does is it gives you very practical checklists. These are the 28 things that you should be doing at least once a week to make sure your team is effective. And if you are the one person running your business because you're a solopreneur, well, that checklist applies to you too. And like I said, there's the sort of incumbent sales aspect as well as the new sales aspect. Great book. The Challenger Sale. So what I like about this book is it challenges the notion that we have to tiptoe around our clients. The Challenger Sale, in lockstep with that byline, taking control of the customer conversation. It's about getting on your toes a little bit and having the courage to really put your customer in the hot seat. If you're selling B2B, odds are your sales pitch is predicated on some iteration of what you're doing today is wrong. And you've got to find a way to say it with courtesy, with professionalism, but also with a little bit of an edge. This is a great book to teach you how to do that. The last piece, this is not a sales book. Made to Stick is closer to a marketing book, but it's not even that. It's about storytelling. And it's about the proven building blocks of effective stories that remain in people's minds. And there's just boatloads of examples, real life examples, many of which you would have heard in your lifetime, many of which you have not. And both are illustrated for different reasons. But it basically takes you through the mechanics of what makes a story stick and what can you just throw overboard, which is just a waste of time. So maybe, kudos to anyone who goes through and reads all 6. That would be cause for a round of applause. But that's basically it for fundamentals of B2B sales. I know this is doesn't leave a ton of time for discussion, but hopefully it gave you something to think about.
Outstanding. What a fantastic just snapshot of all of the most important aspects of this process and this industry. Definitely got me thinking about a lot. Does anyone have any questions for Paul or any comments?